Right. We covered some of the major approaches to eschatology, premillennial, amillennial, postmillennial. All that ringing a bell? Good. And so we covered that, and this week we're going to move into the speculative eschatology. So here's my caveat. So this obviously is, thank you, my wife. Anyways, this week, I want to put a caveat out there that obviously there are many ideas about the interpretation of eschatology, of which what you're going to hear some of this morning is one perspective. Okay? So this is just theory, guess, hypothesis, however you want to put it. My take on how I see things playing out. It's subject to adjustments and changes because we see prophecy as a revelation that we interpret as God reveals the answers to us. Okay, so as we see the things, as we see the day approaching, as we see things unfolding, we come to a fuller understanding of what the prophecies are, how they're to be interpreted. Also, I make no apologies that this comes from my own particular present historical, cultural, and geographical position, because it is impossible for me to look at them from any other position. Because this is where I'm at in history, in culture, in geography, in socioeconomics, whatever you want to put it, this is where I'm at. And so when I read the book of Revelation, when I read Daniel, when I read Matthew and Mark and Luke, all of those things, I can only understand them and interpret them from where I am and who I am, right? So I make no apologies for that. Now, why now? Well, I think, as I was talking to Holly last week, and some other people, I think arguably we live in the most evil generation that has ever existed on the face of the planet, with the possible exception of the generation that existed pre-flood. Why would I say that? Well, I think that, one, we have become a global community, right? So the evil that pervades is global. It's not isolated in pockets. Two, is that in all corners of the globe, which is kind of a funny thing to say, in all corners of the globe, the gospel has gone. Now, you may say that it hasn't gone in everybody's individual tribes and languages, right? And that might be true. But on every continent, the gospel has gone. And I would say that it is in the process of being rejected. So, in times past, that has not been the case. In times past, not everywhere on the planet received the gospel. Not everywhere on the planet had the gospel preached to them. But in our age, at this present time, the gospel has gone to every continent. Every single one. So I would say that is a massive shift that has taken place. And I would say, as we see this take place, we also see that in terms of sexual immorality, in terms of blasphemy, in terms of violence, we have never seen a time on the earth that is like this time. Right? It has never occurred. And when we don't think of our society as particularly violent usually. We see that violent crime is actually decreased statistically. But if you take into account the rise in violence against the unborn, against the disabled, against the elderly, we are becoming an increasingly violent society. a very seriously violent society. And I would say in Canada, we live in a particularly wicked and evil place. And this is just an example, when you hear about the fact that an organization has been cutting up children and selling off their body parts to the highest donor, they said, which is just the highest bidder, and it does not cause a moral outrage in a society, you are in an evil society. You are in an incredibly wicked society. When euthanasia is promoted, advertised, right? Then you live in a wicked society. When all forms of vices are celebrated and forms of righteousness are condemned, you live in an incredibly evil society. And that's where we live today. So I would say that in terms of eschatology, we are in a position that would say to me that this is definitely the last days. This is definitely a time when we can start to look for the fulfillment of these prophecies. And if you disagree with me on that there is a more wicked society that has existed in history, I would love to talk to you about it afterwards. Even Sodom and Gomorrah were not as wicked as our society. Okay, so that is... the other thing is that I would say is that in terms of technology, we live in a society where things that were either science fiction in the past or things that were seen as really odd biblical prophecies that other generations just saw as signs, we can see that they are possible literal realities. Right? That we can see things happening with genetics now and with all sorts of other technologies that were beyond the imagination even of previous generations. And they come into reality so quickly, it's amazing. Okay, so I don't have much time, so this is going to be rather fast. So, Revelation chapter 6. What's in Revelation chapter 6? The seals. Just letting you know. Okay? So we know that in Revelation that John has mourned that the seals, nobody was able to open the seals, but then the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Lamb that was slain, had triumphed, and he was given authority to open the seals, and so the seals are begin to break in Revelation chapter 6. And the first seal to be broken is the first rider, who is upon a white horse, is given a golden crown, right, has a bow and is sent out to conquer and for conquest. Now, who is this rider? Well, there are obviously almost as many ideas of who the rider is as there are theologians. But my take on who the rider is, and I'll explain why, is that this first rider is the age of kings, which is over. Right? All secular historians would tell you that the age of kings is past, that it is done. The idea of conquest and colonialism is a thing of the past, that in terms of government, we have dictators today, but we don't really have kings. Right? And if you think of the kings of the past, that type of governing no longer exists. It's gone. And so we live in a post-first rider age. Now, I looked at this, you could say that the white horse is Christianity. I'd go for that. Because Christianity, as a governing authority, has conquered every continent. Right? It has. Every single continent has been subjected to Christian colonialism. Any disagreements? No. And so I would say that the first writer has written. What does a bow mean? I don't know. I don't know what the bow means. If anybody's got any ideas, I'd be happy to find that out. But the writer has a crown, he rides a white horse, and he goes out for conquering and conquest. And I would say that that is the age of kings which is past. The second rider is the rider upon a red horse. And this rider takes peace from the earth and has a great sword. What might that correspond to? War. What kind of war? Because remember, what I want to emphasize in this is these are global phenomenon. These are not localized phenomenon. These are global phenomenon. So what would this rider correspond to? Well, thank you. The World War. I didn't think it was that complicated. The World Wars, right? He takes peace from the globe, from the earth, right? And so this second rider is the one. The great sword could either be the type of warfare that exists today, right? That we have in the 20th and 21st century, more people have been killed in war than any other previous century. That is a fact, right? So you could say that either the great sword is the type of warfare that is extremely devastating, extremely killing, or you could say that it might refer to atomic warfare, right? That is a sword that has never previously been envisioned. Like devastation on that sort of scale that the atomic age has introduced has never previously happened. And it is a global phenomenon. All right, so either one of those could be true, or both of them might be true. So I would say that the first rider is written, the age of kings. The second rider is written, the time of global warfare that is of that kind of scale. So what would be the third rider? The third rider is the rider with a pair of scales that is on a black horse, and we remember that the cost of an ounce of barley is a denarius, which is a day's wages. According to some of the stuff I said, it was $148, right? Was how much a denarius is worth in present money. So what could that be? Well, most of the commentators that I looked at said that was famine. I'm not sure I agree. Why wouldn't I agree? What do we experience? Inflation. Right. I don't know if it's particularly the type of inflation that we're understanding, but remember, when I say this is global phenomenon, the scales, I would say, indicate trade. And so we're looking at a type of worldwide economy that has never existed before in human history. Right? And this economy is tied together. It's a form of trade that is completely tied together all over the planet. And so everything is affected everywhere. And so I would say that this third rider is an economic collapse, right? Which causes incredible inflation. And I would say that there are many economists out there that say that we are absolutely due for that. That the crash is definitely on the horizon. And many of the circumstances, although not all of the circumstances that were in place for previous economic collapses are in place now. Right? But remember, if you had problems in Rome, or if you had problems in China economically, they were isolated, right? They only impacted those civilizations, and maybe to a certain extent the civilizations that surrounded them. But what happens now if there's an economic collapse? It affects the globe. And we know that. We've seen that. Okay, so that are the 4 riders. Any questions? Excellent. Okay, so we go on to the 5th seal. And what is the 5th seal? The 5th seal is the souls of martyrs under the altar, right? And what are they doing? What's that? Oh, I didn't either. Sorry, I am in a bit of a rush. Okay, 4th rider. See? Good. Paying attention. That's excellent. Okay, 4th rider is who? The 4th rider is the pale horse, right? And the riders are death and Hades, right? And what happens with these? Okay? There's war, famine, pestilence, right? There are all these things happen with the 4th rider. I would say that the 1st rider has ridden, the 2nd rider has ridden, the 3rd rider I would say is probably riding or is about to ride, and after the 4th rider, so we've seen changes in government, changes in warfare, changes in economy, and we're going to see a complete cataclysm in world order in the 3rd rider, which results in quite possibly a 3rd world war, right? That is different from previous world wars, right? And it is a global catastrophe that disrupts the entire political, economical, social system. It's an incredible upheaval and results in widespread death and destruction. All right? So that would be the 4th rider. Okay. So, and a quarter of the earth that is referred to in the 4th rider may be either percentage-wise or geographical. Right? It could be that it's a percentage of the population, a percentage of the of countries, whatever, or it could be specifically geographical, a specific region of the earth, that it works out to be a quarter of the earth. Okay. So, the 5th seal is the souls of those under the altar, and they're crying out. I would say that after the 4th rider is the beginning of the intense persecution of the church. And Christians begin to be killed. And I don't mean just a few places. I mean massive hatred and execution of Christians. And the people of God cry out for justice. And what are they told? They're told, wait until your number is complete. And I would say at this point that there is a tremendous massacre of Christians globally. That Christians are killed wholesale. That all nations hate Christians. We see the seeds of that even today, right? We see the seeds of evangelical Christians are seen as those who cause more harm. This was a poll. Evangelical Christians are seen as those who cause more harm than good, right? We see increasing hostility, that Christians are seen as those who are an impediment to the progressive movement. And one of the things I would impress upon you is that what we saw during the COVID age is how quickly things can turn from being relatively peaceful, going about your daily life, to becoming incredibly hostile. And you may, whatever your perspective on the severity of the pandemic, what it told us was that it only took that to make churches split, to make churches empty out. It only took that to make the people in the communities start to badmouth these right-wing evangelicals. And if it only took that to make that possible, what would happen if there was widespread devastation and we were the scapegoats? It would take very little for that kind of severe persecution to break out. And we've seen this kind of thing happen to the Jews in the past, right? During World War II, we saw the incredible... It wasn't just in Germany that attitude pervaded. It was the anti-Semitic attitude was very pervasive, almost globally, I would say. And so, even though the locus was in Germany, you saw pogroms in Russia, right? So, pogroms, I can't remember how to pronounce it, but you saw that kind of thing happen in Russia against the Jews. So, it wasn't simply in Germany that the persecution of the Jews took place. Well, people are the same. The wickedness that exists in the heart of man is the same. The hostility towards God is only increasing. And so we can predict very easily, and you don't have to take my word for it, Jesus actually said it. In Matthew 24, he says that he doesn't say some of you will be, he says you will be killed because of my name. That's what he says, categorically. And you will be hated by all nations. Not just some nations, all nations. So you will be killed and you will be hated by all nations. Okay, so then we go on to the sealing of the 144,000. I have heard all sorts of explanations of how those are not Jews, but they're Jews. I'm telling you. They are those from Israel who are sealed. They are the entourage of Jesus Christ. They are the ones who are His immediate attendants, let's say. Then we see the multitudes. Who are these multitudes in white robe that surround the throne? Is that where the rapture happened? I would say categorically no. Because it tells you. Okay, if we look at the tribulation, the great tribulation against the people of God as a slaughter of the Christians, right? These martyrs who were given white robes and cry out for justice are told, wait till your number is complete. What happens here is there is a multitude from every tribe, nation, and tongue around the throne in the white robes, right? And where do they come from? It says categorically they come from the Great Tribulation. So these are those saints, these are those Christians who have been slaughtered for the name of Jesus Christ all over the world. All over the world. And there's a lot of them. That's who I would say is the multitude. Because it says so. They're the ones that came out of the Great Tribulation, and they are the ones that you can really make a direct correlation, a direct comparison between them and the souls of those who are under the altar crying out for justice. Right? Seems fairly clear to me. Okay, now I have to go on to... So, that is the seals. What comes after the seals? The trumpets, in case you're wondering. Okay, so the seventh seal is broken. There's silence for a half an hour, and Chris always loves to make the joke about no women in heaven. And so there's the trumpets begin to sound. Now I would say, and because I haven't got much time, I would say that the trumpets, that the Antichrist is not during the seals. The Antichrist does not arise until the trumpets. And the trumpets are this time. Oh, I forgot one thing that was very important. Okay, so we see that there is signs in the heavens and earth, and all the nations cry out in fear, right? And the rulers and the kings say, hide us in caves and under the earth, right? And it says, because of the wrath of the Lamb. Why might that be? Because then Revelation goes on, right? It goes on. It doesn't end there. It doesn't say, oh, and then Christ comes back, it's all done, right? It doesn't end there. Why do you think they're crying out? They have just slaughtered Christians worldwide. What would Christians be doing at this time during the slaughter? Vast slaughter. They would be, one, crying out to God and publicly proclaiming the end of the world. Right? And then there's some sort of cataclysmic occurrence that happens, and the people of the earth think that the end has come and that Christ has come to reap judgment upon the earth. And so they're scared, and rightfully so. But the end doesn't come. And what happens when there's a big scare and then the end doesn't come? People get defiant. They big deal, right? You said the end was going to come. This happened. We got scared, but it didn't come. So we're going to go on with life. And that is what I see happening at that point. That's why it doesn't end there. Because Christ does not come back at that point. I'll tell you what I think does happen, though. I think that during this great slaughter of the Christians, there are refugees of Christians that flee to Palestine. And at the same time, like we have massive devastation and destruction all over the earth, at the same time, there is a movement in Palestine towards the Messiah. And I do believe that there are two witnesses, prophets, that are, and their identification I don't have time to go into, but these two prophets that witness call Israel back, just like John the Baptist did. Call Israel back to repentance. The Christian refugees come to Palestine, and guess what phrase they're welcomed with? Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Jesus says, you will not see me again till what? Till you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. So, these Christian refugees come back to Palestine. And they flood Palestine. They are the two lampstands and the two olive trees that exist. The Jews and the Gentiles who have put their faith in Jesus Christ are gathered together for a last stand in Jerusalem specifically. And they stand against the entire world. Now, I got more stuff, but I'm going to focus on this. Okay, so they make the last stand. I have the feeling that many of the forces that Islam is probably joined in a marriage of convenience to the Antichrist who rises up at the time of the trumpets. They make an alliance with Israel, quite possibly for access to the holy sites, which has been the case in the past. This treaty between Israel and the Antichrist exists for a short period of time. Let's say 3.5 years maybe. Okay? At which time the Antichrist gains access to the temple. It says that when you see the abomination that causes desolation standing where he doesn't belong, then let it be known to you that that is the time when you're supposed to flee. Not beforehand, but at that point you're supposed to flee. And at that point he breaks the treaty, he slaughters the inhabitants, the Christian and Jewish inhabitants of Jerusalem, and leaves all of their bodies in the street. And the whole world rejoices. Why? Because they have killed the two plagues upon humanity, Christianity and Judaism, which, as we know, are hated by the entire world. And so those two have been finally defeated, and everybody on the planet goes, yay, now we can have peace because our enemy is dead. Okay. We are almost out of time. Okay, so that is the fall of Jerusalem, and this is the lowest point in human history. Why? Because the witnesses have been removed. The witnesses have been removed, and so there is nothing left but the wicked. Now, I'm not saying that all Christians have been removed, right? There is obviously those who flee, because that's what they've been instructed to do. And there is a remnant of Christians that still exist. Just like in ancient Israel where it says, I'm the only one left. And no, there's 7,000 who have never bowed the knee to Baal. So there is a remnant, but they're few and scattered. This is the lowest point in human history. This is the highest point for the Antichrist and the forces of darkness since the death of our Savior on the cross. And so at this point, at the lowest point, that is when the last trumpet is blown. Okay, so you got the trumpets, and the trumpets all go through, and it has to do with hail and fire mixed with blood, the mountain, the flaming mountain that falls into the sea, wormwood on the waters that poisons people and they die. The lights in heaven are darkened. There's these demonic locusts that come up, and there's the weird war horses, right? All of these things take place, and I would say that has to do with the rise of the kingdom of the Antichrist, and he establishes himself. And then the last trumpet. What is the significance of the last trumpet? Thank you. Quite obvious. It's the last trumpet. But at the last trumpet, as has been stated in Corinthians, as Christ states, the last trumpet is the trumpet at which Christ returns and the rapture happens. And in Revelation, at the last trumpet, you see the reapers sent out. One reaper is to harvest the earth. The second reaper is to harvest the grapes for what purpose? The wrath of God. What is the next thing that happens after the trumpets? The bowls of God's wrath. Right? So we do not experience the wrath of God. Right? It says so in 2 Thessalonians. We do not experience the wrath of God. And the wrath of God is poured out when? It's happening all the time. But specifically, it's poured out during the bowls. And it is poured out upon the earth. And it is, if you read the bowls, it's devastation from, I see, you you do the Paula thing. It's not my fault, it's Sherry's fault for going overtime on the intro. Anyways, the bulls are, I compared them to an artillery barrage before the invasion. And they devastate the planet in such a way that it is irrecoverable. Right? Why do I say that? The entire oceans turn to the blood of a dead man. They're congealed. And everything in them dies. Everything dies. And the fresh water is turned to blood. Right? There is an earthquake that happens that flattens the earth. And that's the last bowl is where you hear about these 100-pound hailstorms that the people blaspheme and curse God because it's so severe. Okay? So the bowls of God's wrath, what? I know it's time. I'm working on it. We're at the bowls, for Pete's sakes. Okay, so the bowls are poured out, massive devastation, and then Christ comes back. How does that work? I don't know. Right? I can't tell you because his parousia is, to me, very fuzzy. And I think there's a reason for that, is because we're not supposed to know exactly how that happens. Right? We're supposed to look for the signs. We're supposed to be watchful, but we do not know the day or the hour. And so this second coming of Christ to the earth, where his feet touch down, I don't understand. Okay, that brings us to the end of bowls. There's all sorts of things that I didn't cover. If you want to know about them, you can ask me later. We're done.